93 years old. More than 130 credits. A knighthood, 2 Oscars, and a career that stretches back to a British Army stint in Korea before he'd even settled on the name Michael Caine. Almost everyone who shaped that career, the co-stars, the mentors, the fellow working-class kids who clawed their way into an industry that wasn't built for them, is gone. Caine has never sat for an interview and ranked the people who mattered to him most. He's not that kind of actor. But across 70 years of interviews, memoirs, and unscripted tributes, a pattern shows up again and again. 5 names that surface every single time, in his own words, without prompting. This is the story of those 5 people, and what each of them gave a Cockney kid from South London who once assumed every film would be his last. Start with the one that broke the internet's heart in 2017, because it says the most about what closeness actually meant to Caine. When Roger Moore died on May 23, 2017, tributes poured in from every corner of the film industry. Sean Connery called him a friend defined by an unusually long relationship by Hollywood standards that was filled with jokes and laughter. Daniel Craig offered a 2-word nod to Moore's Bond theme. Pierce Brosnan called him magnificent. Every single one of those tributes read like exactly what they were: gracious, professional, heartfelt statements from colleagues. Then there was Caine's. Site index equals 2-1, he wrote that he was devastated, describing Moore as one of his oldest and closest friends and saying his world would never be the same again. /site, no polish, a typo left uncorrected, no careful phrasing. It read like something typed in the middle of actual grief. What makes it more interesting is that Caine and Moore barely worked together. They weren't bonded by a shared franchise or a grueling location shoot. Their friendship predates most of their fame. It was built the old-fashioned way, through decades of overlapping London social circles, mutual friends, and a shared origin story. 2 men from ordinary British backgrounds who became 2 very different kinds of leading man. Moore turned suave unflappability into an art form as Bond. Caine built a career on danger, wit, and a refusal to sound like anyone else on screen. Different lanes, same era, same city, same sense of humor. That's what makes the tribute worth sitting with. Caine wasn't mourning a professional acquaintance he'd shared a call sheet with. He was mourning someone who'd been there since before either of them was famous. A friendship that had nothing to do with a studio contract and everything to do with genuine, decades-long affection. If Moore was the friend Caine leaned on outside the industry, the next name on this list is the one who taught him what the industry actually was. By 1972, Laurence Olivier wasn't just a respected actor. He was, by most accounts, the most decorated stage performer Britain had ever produced. Knighted. Mythologized. The kind of name that made other actors nervous just hearing it attached to a project. So when Caine was cast opposite him in Sleuth, a 2-hander thriller with no supporting cast to hide behind, he had every reason to be intimidated. This wasn't a film where a weak scene could get buried under other performances. It was 16 weeks of just 2 actors, 1 house, and a psychological chess match that demanded both men carry every single minute of screen time. Caine has told the story of what happened next for over 50 years, and it hasn't changed in the retelling. About a week into the shoot, Olivier turned to him and delivered what Caine has repeatedly called the best review of his career. Site index equals 22-1. Olivier told him that at first he'd thought he had a servant, and that he now realized he had a partner. /site. Think about what that line actually does. It isn't flattery. It's Laurence Olivier, the most garlanded actor of his generation, telling a working-class kid from the Elephant and Castle that he'd earned equal footing, on screen, in real time, with nowhere for either of them to hide. Both men ended up nominated for the Academy Award for their performances that year. Neither won it. Marlon Brando took the prize for The Godfather. By every account, that loss barely registered next to what Olivier had said to him privately. The respect clearly outlasted Olivier himself. When Caine took on Olivier's old role in the 2007 remake of Sleuth opposite Jude Law, he made a point of telling interviewers it wasn't a remake at all. It was an entirely new script by Harold Pinter, sharing only the title and the bare bones of the plot with the original. It's a small detail, but a telling one. Caine didn't want to be seen retracing a film that had meant that much to him, now that the man who made it mean that much was no longer around to weigh in on it. Olivier was the mentor who validated him. But there's one actor Caine has spent 50 years calling something closer to family. If you know anything about Michael Caine's career, you already know where this is going. In 1975, Caine and Sean Connery starred together in The Man Who Would Be King, John Huston's adaptation of the Rudyard Kipling novella about two disgraced ex-soldiers who con their way into ruling a remote kingdom. Caine has said, more than once and without hesitation, that it's his favorite film of his own career. Not his biggest hit, not his most awarded, his favorite. The project itself had a strange path to the screen. Huston had been trying to get it made since the 1950s, cycling through potential leads that included Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable, then Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, then Paul Newman and Robert Redford. According to Caine, it was reportedly Newman himself who suggested Connery and Caine take the roles instead, a gesture Caine has said he found genuinely touching, given that one of the biggest stars alive had essentially talked two British character actors into a part that could have gone to virtually anyone. The friendship carried on for the rest of Connery's life. When Connery died in October 2020 at age 90, Caine's tribute was, once again, immediate and unguarded. Site index equals 34-1. He called Connery a great star, a brilliant actor, and a wonderful friend, then added a line that only made sense to anyone who'd seen the film they made together. The man who would be king was the king. /site, it's grief expressed as an inside joke, the kind of tribute you can only write about someone you actually knew, not just worked alongside. What made the Caine-Connery friendship unusual, according to people who covered both their careers, is how little competition ever crept into it. Hollywood has a habit of pitting leading men of the same generation against each other, especially two of the biggest British stars alive at the same time. Caine and Connery reportedly avoided that trap almost entirely. Both had working-class roots. Both had done time in the military before acting. Both spent years fighting their way into an industry that didn't hand out opportunities to men who sounded like them. That shared struggle, by most accounts, built something closer to genuine kinship than professional rivalry. But before Caine ever worked with Connery, before Sleuth, before any of it, there was a 5-minute conversation with an American legend in a hotel lobby that Caine still tells, word for word, more than 50 years later. This one didn't start as a friendship. It started as a fluke. In the mid-1960s, fresh off the success of Zulu, The Ipcress File, and Alfie, Caine found himself staying alone at the Beverly Hills Hotel, his first trip to Hollywood, waiting for Shirley MacLaine's schedule to free up so they could start filming Gambit together. Nobody in Los Angeles knew who he was yet, so he passed the time the way any starstruck young actor might, sitting in the lobby, watching for famous faces. One day, according to Caine's own retelling in his memoir Blowing the Bloody Doors Off, a helicopter landed in the hotel gardens and out walked John Wayne in full Western costume. Site index equals 70-1. Wayne crossed the lobby, asked Caine his name, recognized him from Alfie, and told him he was going to be a star, before adding a piece of advice. Talk low, talk slow, and don't say too much. /site, Caine has called it, repeatedly and across decades of interviews, the single most useful acting note he ever received. Then came the advice people actually remember, because it's completely absurd. Wayne looked down at Caine's shoes and told him to get rid of them. They were suede. When Caine asked why, site index equals 58-1, Wayne explained that once Caine was famous, he'd eventually be recognized by a stranger standing next to him at a urinal, and in the excitement of that moment, his shoes would pay the price. /site, Caine has said, laughing, that he took the warning seriously enough to give away every pair of suede shoes he owned, to people who weren't famous yet. It's a ridiculous story. It's also a genuinely revealing one. Wayne had no reason to. Look out for a young British actor he'd never met before that afternoon. He did it twice, unprompted, in the span of one chance encounter, simply because he liked what he'd seen on screen. Caine has referred to him warmly ever since, and in his own writing he's grouped Wayne alongside figures like Olivier as people whose brief kindness genuinely shaped how he carried himself for the rest of his career. That's rare company to earn from a single hotel lobby run-in. Wayne barely knew him. The next person on this list is the one who said, in her own words, that she's the reason Caine's American career happened at all, and Caine has never once argued with her about it. Here's the story that arguably changed the entire direction of Caine's career, and it starts with a contract clause most people never think twice about. In the mid-1960s, Shirley MacLaine, already one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, had contractual approval over who would be cast opposite her in Gambit, a heist comedy she was developing. While scouting a different director, the studio screened one of his earlier films for MacLaine as a kind of audition. She wasn't sold on the director, but she noticed one of the actors in that film, a young man in glasses named Michael Caine. She picked him on the spot to be her leading man, without so much as a script reading. MacLaine has told the story warmly in her own recollections, describing how she spotted him and knew almost instantly he was right for the part. Site index equals 81-1. She's recalled that Caine would later say the opportunity was how he got into Hollywood, and that she'd been remarkably kind to him after everything he'd heard about difficult, standoffish stars. Site, for a total unknown with nothing to offer her in return, that kind of generosity from one of the biggest names in the business left a mark. Caine, for his part, has never been shy about crediting her directly. He said he'd have taken almost any part just to get a foothold in an American film, script or no script, which underlines exactly how much that opportunity meant to a young actor still uncertain his career would last. And the timing worked out in his favor. While Gambit was still shooting, Alfie opened back home and turned him into a genuine star in Britain, so by the time Gambit reached American theaters, he was already a recognizable name. But MacLaine had chosen him before any of that happened, when there was nothing on paper to suggest it would work out at all. The two of them reunited decades later for the 2005 comedy Bewitched, and by every account, the warmth between them hadn't faded in the nearly 40 years separating the two films. Lay all five side by side and something becomes obvious fast. There's almost no overlap in who Caine gravitated toward. This isn't five actors from the same clique trading favors. It's a knighted stage legend, a Bond star turned lifelong friend, a fellow working-class Brit who became his closest peer, an American Western icon who barely knew him, and a Hollywood power player who bet on him before he'd proven anything. The common thread isn't genre, nationality, or even how long the relationship lasted. It's that every one of them either handed Caine an opportunity he hadn't yet earned, or told him something honest he genuinely needed to hear. Olivier's verdict about partnership, Wayne's blunt advice on a hotel lobby afternoon, MacLaine's decision to bet on an unknown, Connery's decades of unspoken loyalty, Moore's friendship that predated the fame entirely. Caine has said before that he treats acting like a job, ruthlessly professional, never brought home with him. But the way he talks about these five people tells a different story. They weren't colleagues he was polite to on set. They were the people who actually shaped the man playing the part. At 93, with most of the names on this list already gone, Caine is one of the last people alive who can tell these stories firsthand. That's what makes them worth paying attention to now, while he's still the one telling them.